Hey everyone, for those who don't know me, my name is Austin, and it is May, and May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And again, for those who don't know me, um, and for those who do, you know, I've struggled with my mental health for quite a long time, and so mental health advocacy and things like that are something I think are really important, and they're definitely really important to me. So today I wanted specifically to talk about OCD. That's what I live with, and I think that it's something that's very widely misunderstood. And so I want to just share a little bit more about what OCD is, and more specifically, I want to share my story with living with OCD. So to start, what I want to talk about first is what is OCD, some of the misconceptions, and just give a little bit more information about what OCD is. The National Institute on Mental Health defines OCD as obsessive compulsive disorder is often a long-lasting disorder in which a person has uncontrollable reoccurring thoughts, which are called obsessions, and behaviors, which are called compulsions, that they feel the urge to repeat over and over again. More specifically, obsessions are unwanted, intrusive thoughts, images, or urges that trigger an intensely distressing feeling. That can be shame, it can be anxiety, it can be guilt, it can be sadness, it can be anger, it can be a lot of different emotions. And compulsions are behaviors an individual engages in to attempt to get rid of the obsession and or decrease distress. So this can be anything from checking to rumination. Um, uh, Anything can be a compulsion, just as anything can be an obsession. Um, OCD is a chronic illness. There is no cure, but what is defined as, or what is called the gold standard for OCD is what's known as ERP, which stands for Exposure and Response Prevention Therapy. This is something where a person with OCD exposes themselves to things that will trigger the distress to come up. And it's all about learning how to not do the compulsions, because that is what feeds the OCD cycle. It's not the thoughts, it's actually the things that we do to try to make ourselves feel better or to gain some kind of certainty, which is actually what continues the OCD cycle and feeds that. OCD is very, very often misdiagnosed. One study found that OCD is extremely high risk for misdiagnosis, with a percentage of 55.5% of the time being misdiagnosed as something else. A little bit more about OCD is it's not just about washing your hands. A lot of people when they think of OCD, they think of shows like Monk or maybe even a Big Bang Theory, a couple others. Um, and OCD is very often, especially in media, portrayed as washing your hands. That can be part of what it's like to, or for somebody's experience with OCD, but that's not everyone's. And so that's something that I think is really important to get across. So if it's not just about washing your hands and getting sick, what is OCD? So I want to talk about that now for a moment. Um, Often you'll hear in the OCD community we'll talk about obsessions as being our themes, because there are often things that stick with us. You can have more than one theme at one time. You can switch between themes. Um, the possibilities are endless when it comes to OCD. But some common themes are, of course, contamination. So this is intrusive thoughts, feelings, urges around being contaminated. That could be with a chemical. It could be with a disease. It could be a lot of things. There can also be relationship themed OCD. and that generally looks like, does my partner love me enough? Do I love my partner enough? What if we're a good fit? What if we're not a good fit? Things of that nature. There's also um, themes around harm, causing harm, um, physical and sexual. So this could be anything from having deep, intense fears of wanting to kill family members and having intrusive thoughts and images about things like that, and trying to figure out if those are what we actually want or things that we don't want, or do I want to act on this? That's often what it comes down to for a lot of us with harm OCD. And then same thing with sexual. Because I'm posting this on a platform that has community guidelines, I will talk about this a little bit, but I will put some links in the description for some resources that you can do a little bit more research on your own, especially around these for now. But sexual, this can be anything from, your sexual orientation to to having intrusive thoughts, urges, anything sexual coming up, and then again trying to figure out if those are things that we want to do incessantly, obsessing over it. And this also can include things around sexual acts with people who are underage. It's actually quite common for people with OCD to experience those fears. Sidebar before I continue with the rest of this is that it's very important to distinguish between urges that someone wants and urges or thoughts and images of or that are called ego dystonic. Ego dystonic means that they are against what we actually desire, who we are, what we want, and that is why they are so distressing and disturbing. I think it's especially important to hone in on this point when talking about harm and sexual related themes, because I think that it could be misconstrued as, well, we're having these, does that mean that we're a danger? In fact, no, um, we are not. These are thoughts, images, urges of things that we do not want to do. They are things that terrify us to our core, and that is part of what makes OCD so hard. So going back to and finishing up the rest of the kind of more common themes, you can have what is called moral or religious scrupulosity. And moral religious scrupulosity tends to, in a general way, tends to be about things like, am I a good person? Am I a bad person? Am I following my religion closely enough? Am I doing things that are going to send me to hell? How do I know if I am or not? Those types of things. Again, all of this is a lot more complicated than I have the capacity to be able to present in this. If this is something that interests you, or this is something that you think that you or somebody else might be dealing with, use access the resources that I have in the description to learn more and also get professional help. And lastly, you one of the common ones is what's called real event and or false memory. So these are themes of OCD around real events that have happened to us in our past, memories that come up that won't go away. Did I do something to offend that person? What does that? Why did I do these things in my past? What does that mean? And then the false memory is, okay, I have these memories, but did they actually happen? And questioning that. Again, I've said this before, but it's, I think, also really important to hone in on anything can be a theme or an obsession, and anything can be a compulsion. So just because I give a list of some general things of how it might kind of look, doesn't mean that those are the only things. Okay, and lastly, I want to talk about this briefly, especially because it's misunderstood, not talked about nearly as much, and because it's a big part of my OCD story, is something that's called pure O, or purely obsessional. This is a very poor term for OCD that is only internal. So we have obsessions and compulsions that are all mental. So this can be replaying memories over in our mind. This can be trying to replay those memories to figure out what actually happened. It could be to reassure ourselves that we didn't do something or that something isn't going to happen. It can be checking our responses for things, especially when it comes to urges and harm. We might check our internal response and try to figure out, am I disgusted by these thoughts? Am I not disgusted by these thoughts? Does me being disgusted by these thoughts mean that I want to act on them? How do I know for sure that I'm not going to do this? Now I want to talk about my story and share that. I've decided that I want to do this not because it's easy. OCD has debilitated me and caused me to feel so much shame and so much guilt, and made me feel like I was such a horrible human being. And so this is not easy to talk about, and that's not why I want to. I don't think it's not fun, but I know that if it were not for somebody doing things like this before me, that one, I wouldn't still probably not even know that I had OCD, and two, it is the courage of other people sharing what intimately what their experience has been like, which is what has pushed me and helped me get to where I am today. Before I was diagnosed, I think it's important to say that I have had OCD my entire life, I believe. I believe that it, if not born with it, it began at a very, very young age for me. And I had a lot of, now looking back on it now, there were a lot of things in my life that were probably OCD that I didn't realize could be OCD until more recently. So when I was a kid, where it really how it really showed up for me was with getting ill. There was a period of my life where I was maybe 11 or 12, maybe a little bit younger, where I was terrified that I was going to contract spinal meningitis, to the point where my mom's a nurse, where I would ask her about symptoms. How do I know? I remember reading or hearing on the news at around that time that spinal meningitis was something that, um, a symptom of that could be like a stiff neck. And I remember beginning to feel like I had a stiff neck. And that's something I want to add to, is that I haven't already talked about, is that OCD can make us feel things that aren't actually there. So, like if I hear on the news that spinal meningitis can cause stiff neck, my my body starts to feel like my neck is getting stiff, like it's like it creates sensations. It can create, not for everybody, but it definitely does for me, which makes it feel so real. So that kind of came and went throughout my childhood, but definitely by the time I turned 17 was where OCD really hit me hard. um, when I was 17 years old, I had decided that I wanted to grow long hair. And about the time I decided that I wanted to grow my hair out long, I started getting intrusive thoughts, fears about, what if I'm going bald? And that led to so many hours of looking at my hairline in the mirror it was I would check other people's hair and compare their hairline and their hair density to mine. I would ask my parents to look and ask them, like, do you think I'm going bald? Like, when I brushed my hair the other day, there was a lot of hair that came out. Are you sure that means that like, are you sure that I'm not going bald? I would Google things like how to know if you're going bald. I would Google things about how to prevent yourself from going bald. And I even tried to take some supplements as a 17-year-old kid, to prevent myself from going bald, which, I'm almost 27 now. So that was almost 10 years ago. And it hasn't happened. And I knew it. And that was the really confusing part for me, was that I knew, like, objectively, I could see that nothing about my hair was changing. I objectively knew that it wasn't actually happening, but I could not convince myself that it wasn't happening anyway. Another thing that I want to add as a sidebar before I continue is that OCD will attack the things that we care about. So, in the example of my first really big OCD episode, was losing my hair. And it was because I was trying to grow my hair. So that's another thing to keep in mind with OCD, is often the themes that we develop are revolving around things that we really deeply care about. So after that had happened, that theme eventually kind of faded away on its own, but new things began to take over for me. Mostly relationship OCD as well as harm OCD. I was really battling with, or struggling with, being in a relationship that wasn't good for me at that time, and really obsessing about, does this person love me? Do they not love me? Do I love them? Do I not love them? I said that I did, but what if I don't? Even though, it was things like that. And it was around, what if I'm a selfish, narcissistic, abusive person? And so, I was getting intrusive thoughts about that constantly, both of those things. And that not only r- took a toll on a few relationships that I had, both friendship, romantic, and familial. Um, it eventually put me in the hospital. I was hospitalized 3 times in, I think, the span of like 3 or 4 years. It was basically one a year for a solid 3 years. Maybe it was a little more spread out than that. And I remember I got so many different diagnoses. I got diagnosed with major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, bipolar 2. I was even asked at one point if something I was doing was while I was psychotic. Um, and to this day, I can't believe that that was what I was asked. And it also scared the shit out of me. I have OCD, and so I was terrified that I had schizophrenia. Um, a whole other story in itself, but um, just totally, uh, yeah, just was bouncing around, wasn't getting the answers that I wanted. And, major depression, generalized anxiety felt closest. Bipolar disorder and, other things just didn't ever really feel right, for me. And I remember really pushing that with the mental health professionals that I was interacting with. And one thing that they said to me a lot was that, diagnosis doesn't matter. What you're diagnosed with does not matter. And the reason I bring that up is because I was in the mental health system for nearly a decade before I actually got properly diagnosed and properly treated. And the way that OCD is treated is different than how OCD is treated with not just, but just depression or just anxiety. You have to treat OCD differently. In fact, In fact, being in the mental health system, getting not getting proper treatment was actually making things worse for me. Because as I've said, rumination, trying to figure things out and getting reassurance can be compulsions. And there are certainly some very prominent ones for myself. And, so going in and just doing regular talk therapy um, was talking about these things ad nauseum and feeling like I left with answers, but then that doubt would just come right back. But yeah, are you sure? Yeah, but how do you know that XYZ things are true? They said this, but how do you know they're not lying to you just to make you feel better? And so it ultimately for me, it was feeding it. And so I think that there does need to be a balance between focusing and hyperfixating on what diagnosis we get and also getting a proper diagnosis. There needs to be a balance between those two because I know that had I been diagnosed sooner, I might have suffered less. And so I think that while I understand where mental health professionals are coming from when they say that, um, I think that perspective can fall into imbalance and also cause harm. Okay, so now to getting diagnosed. I had been dealing with sexual harm themed OCD for about 2 years, um, and I was in a really dark place. Um, it attacked my morals, it attacked my values. I was terrified, and there is still that doubt for me now. But I was so scared that there was something from my past that was going to come back to haunt me. I was so afraid that, maybe I harmed somebody in the past and that they were going to come out and it was going to send me to prison. Um, and it was devastating. It was devastating, and I could not get that to stop. It got so intense for me that I was going to 12-step meetings because I thought I was a sex addict. Because of all of these intrusive images, these thoughts, all of this that were coming up for me, that, yeah, I went to a 12-step program because that's what I thought was going to happen. I also did it because I thought that maybe if I do this now, maybe it won't send me to prison. So it was a compulsion in itself that I didn't even realize until recently. Not that is not to say the 12 step hasn't taught me so many important things, just life lessons, and it has given me a lot, and I've gained a lot, and I feel very grateful for that. Um, and it just wasn't healthy for me because it was a compulsion. I was getting reassurance. I was trying to figure it out. I was trying to prevent some awful catastrophic thing from happening in the future that may or may not actually even be a real issue. Toward the end of that 2 year period, I had seen a video on YouTube with a woman named Chrissy Hodges who was being interviewed. And um, she was talking about her experience with OCD. She said that she had OCD, and she was sharing her experience about that and sharing the experience of others and what that might be like. And I was hearing these things like, yeah, people have these themes around getting stuck in fear of something terrible happening, or coming back to haunt them from their past. All of the things like I just shared about myself. And um, that saved my life because I was miserable. And this gave me hope that maybe I don't have to suffer like this anymore. I made an appointment to get a essentially to seek a diagnosis, to see, to talk with a professional who specialized in OCD, to basically get an evaluation to see if maybe if this is something that I'm actually dealing with. And it was maybe a 30-40 minute long conversation with my now therapist, who told me at the end that um, that that she strongly believed that what I was living with was OCD. And that was back in October of 2024, so last year. And it changed my life. It was liberating because I had been suffering so much for almost 10 years. And I finally had a name for, for what was going on. And then OCD being OCD, I got off the call with my now therapist and immediately fell into what's called meta OCD, which is do I actually have OCD? What if my therapist doesn't actually know anything about OCD? What if I'm lying and I don't realize it? um so, again, OCD attacks the things that we care about. But all seriousness, I've been doing ERP now since October of last year. It's and yeah, it has completely changed my life. ERP and exposing myself to things that are scary and that trigger OCD, and learning how to not feed that cycle by not doing those compulsions is hard. Um, it's like learning how to live life again, and it's so hard. It's so helpful. I have a lot more work that I need to do, and I'm okay with that. Um, but it's also given me my life back. And, you know, OCD is not something that has a cure. And that's something I have a hard time with, at times, is knowing that on some level, it's never really going to go away. It's more that I can learn how to not feed it, and how learn how to not allow it to rule my life and take it over. Um, so yeah, that's uh, that's my story. You know, I have so many other things that I could say and that I could share, um, but you know, I think that I've got my message across. And for anybody out there who thinks that maybe you have OCD, or for people who know that that's what they're living with, um, I just want you to know that you're not alone. And I also want you to know that there is help, and it doesn't have to be this way. And it breaks my heart to know how much I've suffered, and to know that there are others out there who have suffered the ways that I have. Um, but hopefully this helps somebody to, yeah, realize that they're not alone, to know that there's help, and to maybe find that help and seek community in that. Thank you for listening to my story. Like I said, I hope this touches you in some way. If not, well, that's okay too. Um, like I said at the beginning, I will put links in the description for resources. I am not a mental health professional, And this is not to be used as a way of diagnosing yourself. If it's something that you think you are living with, please access the resources in the description that will direct you to places where you can get screened, you can get help from professionals who really know how to help. Thank you for watching. May you be well.